Hello everyone, it is Mr. E here, and today we're doing something that I am very excited to do actually, which is, for some of you, it's going to be an insane nostalgia trip. Remembering the last 2 whole years of Darktide's development, where we started with this, the very first piece of content that anyone ever saw about Darktide 4+ years ago, and ending with where we are today. For some of you who've joined us more recently, this is going to be a crazy look into what the state of this game was on launch and some of its development hurdles over time. This game is completely metamorphosed over the last 2 years, and it's coming up on its second anniversary in late November here, as it launched on November 30th of 2022. Now, one thing you'll notice pretty immediately in this trailer, the very first teaser trailer ever launched, which was launched in mid of 2020, is that they anticipated this game would launch in 2021 with an unspecified date. That obviously ultimately did not end up happening. It would just become the first in a long series of indications that there were some problems behind the scenes for Fat Shark in developing Darktide. But before I begin this long and woeful tale, might I interest you in subscribing to the channel? It doesn't cost anything, just a second of your time. I'm fully aware that many of you might be doing the dishes right now, or trying to fall asleep, or maybe doing something else unspeakable. But as long as you've got at least one free hand, you should take it and scroll down and click on the subscribe button. It'll help me reach 10,000 subs before 2025 and keep the Mr. E machine rolling. So here we were, just under 2 years later, we received the next piece of information about Darktide, which was this trailer, and some obvious changes had been made to the aesthetics of the game in one major term, which is that now this game has ogrins in it. That would go on to actually be a huge thing for Darktide. The original idea, what I understand from reading dev posts and blogs about it, was that all of the playable characters would play as just generic guardsmen who would be differentiated by the gear and weapon attachments that they would bring to games. Introducing the Ogren gave the developers a lot of challenges in terms of structuring the environment around having such a large character, and it also allowed them to go more in depth on creating the Psyker and more identifiable other player characters like the Preacher. And the Guardsman ended up being the archetype for just the regular old run-of-the-mill veteran. Now you notice that the launch date has been shifted to September 13th of 2022, and this again would ultimately not end up being the launch date. What is going on behind the scenes at this time is oft speculated, but from my understanding, there was a lot of turmoil about the direction the game should go in terms of its classes and systems. Like I said just a second ago, there obviously was some push at some point into having an exclusively gear and attachment focused class system, and that was abandoned somewhere along the development timeline in order to return to what they had with a more hero-based system with identifiable characters in Vermintide 2. And I think they ultimately made the right decision here, but of note, the weapon attachment system would become a thorn in their side that would come back to bite them just after release. In fact, it would sort of reach its head, and players are obviously still clamoring for the release of weapon attachments today. So just later that year, the game would be available to players. There were several beta tests. Some of the earliest tests were available to media only, like Game Informer, who released some of this game footage in June of that year. This was actually the closed beta test that took place in October, as you can see in the top left corner. I received an invite to this test, but didn't accept it because I didn't see it in my inbox. So I would have been super thrilled to play in it, but you can see that the overall gameplay, it looks fairly similar, but one of the really main things of note here is that the UI itself is radically different. We have a very 2020 plus minimalist aesthetic going on in the UI these days. This UI looks more like it belongs in a game from 2004, like a Doom, or Fear or something like that. It's very techy and green coded. So you can see like the health icon over here for having a health pack. This stuff took up a huge portion of the screen, and yeah, this was really really cool. I played in one of the open betas just before launch. This is like during an era where everyone still thought that there was going to be more than 4 playable classes, and that there were things that Fat Shark was not showing to us, the general public, in these beta tests that was going to be in the full game. So hopes were very, very high because the beta tests, honestly, they were thrilling. Like the way this game plays has always been phenomenal, and the thought was that like I mean, you could see the difference in the way the AI performs. Like the idea that this bomber over here is able to throw multiple bombs and then evade and then reposition himself, fall back like snipers can fall back, is radically different than what we had in Vermintide 2, where oftentimes specials and disablers and things like that were just brain dead. So it was really really cool to see the AI and the game performing like this. However, with this first player hands-on with Darktide, started to come some mutterings of discontent because this game runs terribly, or ran terribly, and kind of still does on a lot of systems. Some say Fat Shark is still working on a way to fix the way this game runs to this day. But yeah, a lot of players straight up weren't able to play this game. It would cause crashes or stuttering or huge drops in frame rate. It is a very intensive game, but there was something else behind these issues, something at the very core of the system that just wasn't working for a lot of players, and that would definitely come back to bite them on initial release. So now that we were approaching the actual launch of Darktide, which was presumably in September of 2022, we started to see a lot more promotional material, both from Fat Shark themselves as well as other gaming outlets, about the storyline of this game, which was a big promotional point. This game's story was written by Dan Abnett, who is a writer for Games Workshop. He's produced a bunch of other 40k novels, so he's very experienced in the universe and people respect his work. So that, plus some of these amazing cinematics that the game was putting out, really lured players into this feeling that the storyline and our place in pushing this world's lore forward, the fight for Tertium and the fight for Atoma Prime, would be a really big focus of the game. Unfortunately, as you may know, that did not end up being the case. In fact, storyline takes a huge backseat to gameplay in Darktide. There are some remnants that you can still see that would make you realize that at some point there was intended to be sort of a campaign storyline, especially your interactions with characters in the intro cinematic or the intro mission where you're escaping from the prison, and as well as the intermittent level up things you get when you have to report to the different rooms upon getting different levels. Those things indicate to me that there was some sort of storyline planned, but it was ultimately not able to be fleshed out in time for the game to be released, and it has been put on the back burner ever since. It has never really been touched on. Fat Shark has done great strides in the last year or so in order to introduce more storyline, and I think the world does a good job at evolving itself through sneaky things like conversations between characters in the Morning Star and in missions that sort of clue you into what's going on in the world without having to spell it out in cutscenes or anything like that. However, it's a far cry from what was promised, and it's another thing that players would grow pretty sour about when the game actually launched. So here we are on the forums, and you can see that even before the launch of Darktide, there were several updates. Now these updates ended up being of huge importance, although the developers behind Darktide didn't cave to the community's requirements or requests immediately, and that would further draw a divide between them. There was a community manager at the time known as Hedge. Hedge and Akshi were actually the two who were mostly involved in community management and community communication. That sounds weird to say, but here's Hedge right here. He was the main sort of touch point for a lot of members of the community, and he became known for having a very confrontational attitude with a lot of members of the community, going so far as to have a lovely interaction with a player where they were asking why couldn't they add weapon attachments to the game? What happened during the development that this was scrapped somewhere along the path line? Because there were very obviously weapon attachments on different marks of different guns. It could be done, and in fact, current modding has proven that it absolutely can be done within the game systems. But his response was, "This is not Call of Duty. We are not designing Call of Duty." This really pissed off a lot of members of the community, and they were already feeling like they weren't being heard, because one of the biggest issues during this pre-beta era, or this pre-launch era, was an issue with taking damage. Initially, when you took damage in the game, the toughness did not function like it currently did. If you had 100% of your toughness and you took damage, the minimum damage you could take from any attack was 10% of that damage. So ranged attacks and melee attacks would penetrate through your toughness and deal damage directly to your health, regardless of your toughness percentage. This was horrible. The chip damage was all over the place, and it meant that playing at higher difficulties was pretty much impossible. Thankfully, they would change this very early on, just after the launch of the game. But the launch came with this being part of it, and that really irritated a lot of people. And we'll get to it in a second, but even after they quote-unquote fixed this issue, there was still a lovely bug in there that made the situation even worse. So on launch of the game, there was obviously that issue with damage bleed through, but also the balances of the classes were all over the place. As we addressed previously, classes were not built in the same way they were are currently. They were built more like they are in Vermintide 2, and they're built very closely to how they are in Space Marine 2. So here we can actually see the original layout for classes in this game, and we thought that there was going to be more than 4 playable classes. There was going to be different abilities available to us. Ultimately, that would end up being the case after a very future update, but on release, this is all we had. You had 1 blitz available to you, 1 aura, 1 ability, and every class had their own iconic abilities. So just to give some reading, this is the frag grenade. The frag grenade only added bleeds to enemies if you took this node right here. This is the aura, that's Scavenger's aura. This had no cooldown, so it was insane. To have a veteran on your team, and you basically had unlimited ammo. The ability was Executioner's Stance, which is still in the game, but is unfortunately the weakest veteran ability now. And then its iconic abilities were 15% weak spot damage and 40% ammo reserve. So you can see that a lot of this stuff ended up being woven into the ultimate tapestry that would become the talent trees later on. In fact, Confirm Kill is basically the same thing as a node that we have in the current veteran tree, as well as many of these other ones. In fact, some of the icons are still roughly the same. So this was the initial layout, and it was very underwhelming for a lot of players, because this offered very little options for optimizing your builds. There were some things that were very broken, however. Of note on the veteran was Demolition Team. I think it's right. Is this Demolition Team? Whichever one it is the icon. It offered a 5% chance for any member of your team to get a grenade back on an elite kill. So there was just infinite grenades going around. Granted, at the time, grenades were not nearly as impactful as they currently are. The Zealot only had access to the stun grenade, which is pretty okay. The veteran only had access to the shredder or frag grenade that did not offer bleeds, and the Ogren had the access to the box, but the box did not explode unless you took a specific talent. So there was just some weird stuff. Think about this, that the veteran launched with Executioner's Stance, the Zealot launched with Fury of the Faithful, the charge, the Psyker launched with Head Pop as their ability, is Venting Shriek as their ability, and then Head Pop as their blitz. And then finally, the Ogren had the charge ability, which is still very good, Indomitable. but there was no such thing as a taunt ogre. There was no bubble psyker. There was no shout veteran. There was no invis zealot. All that stuff came way, way later to the game. And so if you pick it up today, it can feel like those things have been in the game forever, and they simply weren't. In fact, the most customization you got in this game was like this talent tree right here, this upper tier. This is effectively the modifiers that exist in current day Darktide on Executioner's Stance. One of them highlights elite or all gunner enemies, one of them highlights all ogrins, and one of them highlights it for your team. So you had to spend one of your 6 talent points just to get small modifications like that. So really, really crazy stuff to see how reduced the complexity of the system was from where we are today. So before I move on from this era, let's just talk about what the community was feeling at this time. The community was actually very, very mad because of the amount of promises that had been made to them, because of the lack of a storyline, lack of customization, the lack of a lot of features that have been promised, as well as the overall poor performance, like from a specification, like a computer can run the game standpoint. All that was making the community exceedingly mad, and the fact that they had a community manager in Fat Shark Hedge that was sort of poking the bear did not help at all either. And this all culminated in a post released by Fat Shark on the 24th of January, where they basically apologized for having an awful first 2 months of release, and said that they would really strive to do better. The biggest sticking point for many players during this period of time was that one of the most polished and functional features in the entire game was the premium cash cosmetic shop, which obviously was going to get everybody on Reddit worked up into an absolute tizzy. And so they expressed that the premium cash shop would go on a hiatus and not be producing anything new in the meantime while they work to get the game to a functional state. They also just kind of stealthily made it so that Fat Shark Hedge was no longer the community liaison, and that noble title was instead given to Fat Shark Catfish. Now, these very first few weeks of Darktide's launch here actually had one of my favorite bugs in the entire game's history, and that's the toughness bug. The toughness bug was created in a very, very funny way. First off, the game launched and all toughness had an inherent bleed through. So if you had 100% of your toughness and you took any amount of damage, it would deal 10% of that damage to your health, like I addressed previously. They fixed this because of huge community outcry, and they made it so that if you had 100 toughness, you wouldn't take any damage when you took that first hit. Now, what I just said there has the problem in it. They made it so that if you had 100 toughness, 100, not 100%, you had to have exactly 100 toughness, or else you would take damage proportional to the difference between your current toughness and 100. The class that got fucked by this the hardest was the veteran, who had a base 150 toughness. So they would take 50% of all damage through their toughness to their health, because 150 was just as far away from 100 as 50 was, and that was how the game would calculate it. So running toughness curios in this time would make you instantly get killed by range damage, because it would just instantly penetrate your toughness and kill you, or melee damage, I mean. Because they did fix the range bleed through sort of thing. But yeah, just an insane bug. And it was so funny watching them across the dev updates, which you can still pull up. They are realizing that there is a toughness bug, and they know that it has something to do with, players are taking damage at 100% toughness. And in the next patch, you can see they've updated their language, because I think they've realized that the toughness bug is related to the difference between players and the value, the numeric value 100 and not 100%. So there must have just been a missing percent in the code there or something, but very, very funny stuff. Now, speaking more about the game specifically, this minor era of player discontent ended with a really nice update for the game, which is the one we're showcasing here, Blessings on Messiah. This is the one that released the shrine, where Hadron will actually change the blessings on your weapons. You could change up to 2 of them and 2 perks. Now, we were stuck with those locks, those red locks, for years, but we finally cracked those just recently. And but this was a huge improvement over the static blessings that you would get before. It allowed you just that little bit extra element of customization, and the fact they were able to crank this out so fast after release. This came out on the 21st of February of 2023, so it took them almost 3 months after release to get this pushed out, and I think it really did stem the bleeding of players. We dropped from 100,000+ players to just around like 15,000, I think, at the time, and players were able to stick around to play with this. However, that was actually not the most impactful thing to come with that patch. The most impactful thing for me and a lot of players was the Armory. The Armory, which still exists right beside Hadron, is that little robot dude there who can sell you weapons. And previously he sold you weapons, but only the weapons of blue, green, and purple varieties that were randomized in terms of their stats. And so what you would do if you wanted to get a good gun prior to update or prior to patch 4 was you would set your alarm for 7:55 a.m. and you would get up and you would log onto your computer and load up Darktide really quickly. And then at 7:59 a.m. you would check your shop and you would see that it had nothing good in it because there was only 10 items and then 2 curios, and they were randomized from all the items, ranged and melee weapons you could get for your class. So the chances of getting something you actually wanted were super, super low. And then the timer would roll over at the hour. So at 8 a.m. you would check it again. You would sit at your desk for 4 minutes and you'd check it again and you get another refresh. And then that meant you didn't need to check again until 9:59 a.m. So you got a whole hour and 55 minutes to not worry about what the Darktide refresh was doing. And this was how I played the game for the first couple of months here, was just I had timers set on my phone so I could make certain to reach this guy right here who allows us to buy weapons like this nowadays. You didn't used to be able to do this. You had to randomly find them in the shop. And so I remember, I think the day before Christmas I'll put a picture of the axe, my Atrax combat axe, which was one of the best weapons in the game at the time. That was something I found the day before Christmas, and I was so excited. It meant my long quest of camping by this fucking guy every hour or every 2 hours was over. But yeah, a really great update. They also changed weapon blessings to start to make them a little bit more like useful, and they actually did things. A good example of this is they changed the riposte blessing, which was dodging granted you 5% crit for 5 seconds. Imagine that in current day, having a blessing that only grants you 5% crit for 5 seconds. Keep in mind, current day riposte grants you 20% crit for 6 seconds. And they changed it so that the buff was 20%, but only for 2 seconds. So clearly there has been some prioritization changes in terms of making these blessings a lot better and more build defining, but I think they were very scared of it at the time. But that is the end of the really like early nascent era of Darktide, and we're starting to get into a time where they're going to start to actually produce some good content for the game. Now, just over a month later, on March 22nd of 2023, we got the Tools of War update, update 6, and this added variants, different marks for the Force Sword, the Power Sword, the Bully Club, the Thunder Hammer, the Twin Link Stubber, and the Shotgun. And we also got 2 new game mode modifiers, the Shock Troop Gauntlet, which is very popular to this day, and the Vent Purge, which is the one where you have like fog everywhere and the snipers populate the map. Those weren't in the game on launch, and they also did something else that had not been seen prior to this, which was they started combining conditions. So you would actually get missions that were Shock Troop Gauntlets with Ventilation Purge and snipers. However, at the time, there was no Auric missions, so low intensity missions were still in the rotation, and that meant that a lot of times when you were trying to search for missions on this mission board, which only had a certain number of spots, then the spots would be taken up by low intensity missions, which people were still playing at the time. But if you wanted like an interesting and fun and challenging mission, you didn't want those spots being taken up by low intensity. And I think the low intensity from the start has been kind of a mistake to have. But yeah, you can see that the additions that we got in this update, which came out 18 months ago, seems so recent but also so far, were two different variations of the Force Sword, the bad one, which we show here, but also the really, really good one that we showed just previously, the best version of the Power Sword, the Mark 6, as well as the Iron Helm Thunderhammer, the Cantrail Shotgun. I mean, all these have had their, and the Mark 2 and 3 Bullet Club, you can see them there. All of these have had their marks changed since with the most recent update. But this is a really, really good update, and it kept with a nice trend of keeping the ball rolling. They had a really rocky launch, but they started in this period of time here to really sort of claw it back by producing some quality content and putting out content that people wanted to play with and play through. So something that I haven't mentioned yet was something that players really, really hated about the very early pennant system. And if you were a player in this era, you definitely remember this. Players would join your game, and quickly in the chat, they would demand that they were doing X penance, and that required them to do something that was pretty much antithetical to how the game is supposed to be played. This included the infamous Psyker having to solo a boss using only head pop, which meant they needed to do at least 90% of this enemy's health bar using just a pretty low damaging ability, and no other allies could contribute. This was insanely antithetical to the team, cooperation aspect of the game, and it drove a lot of like animosity between members of the community. Players would like join and quit games repeatedly, flame each other, just be toxic in general. And pretty much every class had something like this, where it required you to coordinate with your team, and it just ended up being just such a mess. And so this update forced a lot of those penances into being done only in private games, as well as introducing a lot of new penances and some elements of garb, as you can see in the footage here, that came from accomplishing these penances. And I think this is a great first step towards what ultimately became the full penance system we have today. As teased much earlier on, finally we reach Update 10. This is the update that launched the Chaos Spawn, as well as released two maps that feel like they've only been in the game for a small amount of time, but in fact, this update was in May of 2023, so almost a year and a half we've had access to these missions. These missions are Archive and Sycorax and Ascension Riser. And there you can see the lovely Chaos Spawn. So obviously this update was met with a lot of excitement, and this was only 6 months on from the game's launch. This was really like, we were seeing a lot of really good content put out at a surprisingly good rate for Darktide, and so players were very, very hyped about how the game was going at the time. Granted, it had lost a lot of its very, very early momentum, but the game is starting to evolve into something in its own sphere. We were still really lacking in terms of class builds and diversity, because we're stuck with that old talent tree, but we aren't very far away from changing that up. Update 11 in late June of 2023 introduced crossplay as a feature. This is something that I kind of just assumed was always in the game, but now that I think back on it, I do remember that there was a big clamoring for Game Pass players to have access to this game, and then finally for it to be able to crossplay with PC. Notably, if you turn off crossplay and you're playing on Steam, you will only match with other players who have done the same, which means your pool of players is very, very limited. But that is not true if you are playing on Game Pass. If you turn it off on Game Pass, you will match with both players who have the feature on and off, which is much more usable in my opinion. I kind of wish they would fix this, but who knows? Then we also have the introduction of a new mission, Enclave in Barros, which happens to be one of my favorite missions. So, update 12 was Into the Maelstrom. Into the Maelstrom is exactly what it sounds like. It introduced Maelstrom and Auric missions. This came out in early August of 2023, so it's only been a little bit more than a year that we've had access to these, and it feels like an eternity, honestly. This is one of the greatest additions for players who really want to push their skill, because all Auric missions have high intensity as a modifier. Previously, you had to deal with the fact that half of your list at any given time of playable missions had low intensity or no intensity as modifiers. If we're going to be dealing with this weird, bad mission system we have, at least in this way, we could have some additional choices available to us. It basically doubled the amount of missions you could see. This patch also introduced the shared character wallets, meaning all of your characters shared their Ordo Dockets, Diamantine, and Plasteel, which was amazing for people who wanted to start building new characters. And I think they did this with the idea of what was coming in patch 13 in the front of their mind. So as you can see here, Darktide wasn't doing very well in the months leading up to this next update. This is because there really wasn't any reason to play the game. It was not very replayable. Most classes had one, maybe two builds, and a couple of weapons that just sort of dominated the meta. Players weren't terribly interested in returning to play the game just because of the release of these Auric missions, because the classes themselves weren't that fun or varied or interesting to play. However, all of that was about to change with the single biggest patch this game has ever had, patch number 13, talent trees and the Xbox release for the game. The Xbox release was on October 4th, which coincided with the release of the talent trees update, and these talent trees are just so inspired. If you think about the game in its current state and you think about a Sail Psyker, Bubble Psyker, Taunt or Gun Ogren, Chorus of Spiritual Fortitude or Stealth Zealot, or Shout Veteran, like all of those things were not in the game for nearly a full year after its release. And it is so hard to realize that when you look back now, that all of these things that we take for granted that are just part of the game, like, you know, every game has a Shout Veteran in it now. Prior to that, there was no such thing in existence. It was all Executioner Stance veterans. And so this update just absolutely turned the game on its head. And you can see, when we look at the stats here, that the game jumped up to over 30,000 players and stayed above 15,000 all the way through January of 2024, which was just an immense boost for the game. And it's really what it needed to do to ride through 2024 until where we currently are. So now that patch 13 was out, patch 14 was close behind it with all the changes that needed to be made to keep this thing well within check. There was so much broken stuff, both in a positive for players way and a straight up this ability doesn't work way within the game now with all these new talents and things like that. Some fun things that I found in researching this. Did you know that for a brief blessed moment of time that Veteran Shout not only had a 30-second cooldown, but the gold toughness that you would gain was 100 instead of 50. I think Tanner made a joke about having that be the change to the game in the current meta, but that's actually how it was for a good portion of time. This also introduced the rock. Obviously, the big friendly rock was introduced to Ogren on patch 13, and the cooldown was reduced from 60 to 45 seconds, which has really kept the rock in the meta. Like, rock is so good even now. So I think that this update and getting this next update out only just a few short days later. This update came out just 2 weeks after update 13. This really cemented that Fat Shark was committing to this talent tree thing and was looking to revitalize the game. And I think that this is sort of where the turning point was for me. In terms of, is Darktide going to live up to the legacy of Vermintide? Is it going to be a good game in its own right, or is it just going to end up kind of like being this failed experiment? And this is where I saw the full potential of the game come to be realized in these talent trees, and like opportunities just opened up wide, and it was so exciting to play once again. Our next update brought the Traitor Curse, which was in November as part of the anniversary update. Traitor Curse introduced 2 new maps, the Carnival maps, which have some of the worst end events in all of the games. I particularly hate the one that's in the arena, the Coliseum, where you have to like hang out there for 20 minutes. But these maps are generally really fun to play through, and they have some great aesthetics to them. Again, Fat Shark reaffirming that their art team and their level design team are some of the most underpaid people in the whole building. Those people should be like paid CEO wages, because these maps look amazing and really nail the feel. This also starts a bit of a plot thread with these stims being ferried into Tertium by a character that we haven't heard of yet called Wolfer, and he's apparently like a leader of the Mobian Sixth in some sort, and he seems to have some sort of enigmatic ties to Inquisitor Zola and Explicator Zola and her ilk. It's not yet been fully explored, but this also does tease the introduction of the upcoming Karnak twins, who will become a focus of the event that's to come after this update. So after the Traitor Curse came the Orthus Offensive. This was teased for a good little while that we would be going on the offensive to take out these Karnak twins who'd been taunting us over voice comms. This is a plot thread that still has not been tied up, almost a year to the day since it has been brought out. The Karnak twins seem to have some sort of link, as well as Wolfer seem to have some sort of link to Zola's past, and Zola is a character that many other characters in the game seem to have a explicit distrust of for one reason or another, especially Sephanie, the psyker in charge of the Psychanium. She seems to think that Zola has ulterior motives on her mind, but her mind is shrouded. But this update introduced a short boss rush sort of focus match where you will face one or the other of these Karnak twins several times and then face both of them in an arena. And this is still available for characters to play. It was initially promoted as a limited time event that you could only get these kills in these twins for a short amount of time, but it has persisted and is still on the map. A fun fact here, before this update was out and you could actually click on that little octagonal thing in the bottom left corner to go to that special assignment and fight these twins, I encountered a glitch that put that little button on the corner of my screen for a few seconds, and I was able to click it. It didn't open a menu, but it was there. So I was able to see that there was going to be that interactable that let us launch that mission in that bottom left corner a few days early. I have no idea what caused that, but it was very cool, and I felt like I was in on some sort of secret. Now, if there's one thing that Fat Shark is known for, it's their very extended holiday and summer breaks, and that was no exception this year. Right after they launched this amazing update 13 through 15 that had all these players in the game, they dropped the Orthus Offensive in December and then went on Christmas break. And unfortunately, this Christmas break coincided with sort of a drought of content. I don't think that they had anything in the tube, so to speak, because after the Orthus Offensive dropped, you can see we don't get another patch notes until February 21st, and this patch notes is just some tweaks to various abilities. It has no information, and the power sword and stuff like that. It has no information about new content that's coming to the game, which there's a lot of players who are playing right now and they wish there was new content. And unfortunately, they did not strike while the iron was hot. So you can see that the players fall off pretty precipitously, and by late February and March of that year, the player count is down to the 4,000s again, which is pretty sad. Then in April, finally, Fat Shark, you can see also on their YouTube page here, they're just reposting the soundtracks. But finally, the Path of Redemption update comes out, and this was an awesome update. This is the one that added all those penances that are basically like the free battle pass in the game that unlock lots and lots of cosmetics. And I think these penances give a good glimpse into how the reward system for Darktide is going to be structured in the future, because they've continued to release new rewards with the updated number of penances that they've been putting out in recent months. So I think this is a great focus. I wish they'd had it a few months sooner so it was ready while the while the oh, and let's talk about this guy in a second. While the players were still there after that Christmas break, but it is what it is. And then also we have this asshole, the fucking gas bomber. Patch this guy out of the game, please. What an annoying special, but it's one that makes the game way harder. And every time they add a special to the game, it complicates the combat scenario, and I guess I'm all for that. That is pretty fun at the end of the day. Now, 2 months past that, in June of this year, we have Secrets of the Machine God, a very mixed update in my opinion. We have a few amazing weapons, a couple of terrible weapons, and a really good and difficult map. Clandestium Gloriana is the map, aka the snow map. What an amazing map. I love the variety of events. However, we also got this piece of shit, the bolt pistol. It really sucks, and it still kind of sucks. The pickaxes for the Ogren are awesome. The shock mace is garbage, but the double barrel kicks ass and is a really fun weapon to play with. I wish it had more satisfying sound design though. But yeah, this mission is really cool, and this was a great update. This is sort of, after this update is when I started to really get back into the game, and you'll see that this is just about when I start making content here on the most famous Darktide channel that is in existence. On June 26th of this blessed year, we got the best news that we've had in a very long time for Darktide, that Itemization was coming, the rework that was going to allow all sorts of crafting and deterministic weapon getting for the masses in Darktide. I knew as soon as I saw this that this was going to be absolutely huge for the game, and that the game was finally going to be where I thought it should have been on launch, because this represents the final big hurdle that many players cannot overcome when they face Darktide is, I don't want to spend forever trying to get this randomly ass rolled weapon, and now you can deterministically get it. So this is a very convoluted, long post that goes on for eons, and people were very confused about this all the way up until launch, and they still are, but it signaled great things to come for Darktide. If there was a most impactful update in patch 13, this update is certainly the second most impactful. The Unlocked and Loaded update that introduced both the unlocked crafting system with full masteries and expertise and all those good systems, as well as a new form of map in terms of operations called Rolling Steel, which is this awesome train high-paced action mission. This is, in my opinion, where Darktide finally reached full release. It's feature complete in terms of having lots and lots of maps, tons of build diversity, and you can make any weapon in the game you want with enough focus and determination. Just keep working towards it and you will get it. So this is just an amazing update, and it didn't receive quite the boost in players that previous updates of its size and quality did. We only got back to about 15k, but you know, this, you can see here in this is much more sustainable. You know, we are still here in November, 2 months on from this, and we're at 12k. You know, that's, those people that have joined to play after this update are sticking around, and I credit this to the game like actually having good content to play, not just having a singular hype thing to get invested in, but more in being a feature complete game that has lots and lots of stuff to work towards. And I really have high hopes that we're going to continue this trend, especially with what some of the stuff they've teased with Havoc mode and all that good stuff going into the end of this year. And that's it. We're basically back at current day. Man, Darktide has been through some ups and downs for sure. I'm so glad that I stuck with Darktide. When it initially came out, I fell off of it pretty quick, thinking that it wasn't ever going to be able to live up to its predecessor in Vermintide 2, but how wrong I was. This game has really come into its own and made a mark for itself in the genre. I think it has unparalleled class customization. I could play this thing for hundreds of hours, thousands of hours, and I have. And I'm really hoping that with the upcoming PS5 release, we'll see a new crop of players who are just as invested in this game as I am. And I'm hoping that that all of the consoles are together on the same page now. Now we've got crafting and all that stuff squared away. All the fires are put out and the pieces are all lined up. Now we can focus on the core of the game, on more weapons, more missions, improvements that make the game more fun and more varied to play. And I know they will succeed at that mission. It's just a matter of time. Anyway, guys, I think speaking of time, that is my time for this video. If you would, leave a comment down below and tell me what's your favorite stupid bug or like feature that has existed in any patch in any era of Darktide. Maybe it's something that's long since gone, or maybe it's something that just got added. But yeah, let me know down there. I could think of a good number. I tried to share a couple, but I could go on all day talking about old Darktide glitches. But yeah, that's it for me. Like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Mr. E out. Oh, whoops. Shoot. Okay, I hope no one saw my desktop.